Good morning, everyone. Today is day 9 of the New York State Craft Brewers Conference presented by DWS. Thanks for joining us this morning for a discussion about sustainability in brewing. And we have two presenters here from the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute. Did I get that right, Ken and Trish?
Perfect. Yeah,
okay, perfect. All right. So we have Ken Schlafer. He's the Technical Program Manager at the NYS Pollution Prevention Institute. He works with industries across New York State to reduce cost of environmental impact. Ken has an MS in engineering and global operations management and a BS in chemistry. And Trish is also here with us. Trish Donohue works for the Pollution Prevention Institute as well, which is part of the Rochester Institute of Technology. And she has a BS in environmental management and an MS in environment. So they're well positioned to talk to us today about environmental sustainability specifically. And so they've prepared a presentation. I will turn it over to Ken, who will share his screen with you. And feel free to put any questions in chat. We'll probably get to them at the end of the session rather than throughout this time round. We'll put them in the chat so that we'll be sure to call on you towards the end here. We'll make sure there's time for it. Okay, Ken and Trish, welcome. Nice to have you here with us today.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Megan. I appreciate it. And thank you all for letting us get a chance to talk to you a little about sustainability as well. I'll just go ahead and jump in. As Megan had mentioned, we're both within New York State P2I, which is a much easier way of saying it. It's a mouthful, I know, with the Pollution Prevention Institute, but we wanted to tell you a little about brewery operation, sustainability within the brewery operation itself, but also within the supply chain. And that's going to be really the two focus areas for our talk today. Let's see if I can move on to the next slide. So just a little about P2I. We're headquartered in Rochester, New York at RIT. We're established in 2008, so we've been around for about 13 years now. And on a yearly basis, we get about $4 million in funding from the state. And that helps with a lot of these source reduction type activities. And then down below, I'm not going to list them all, but it really kind of identifies some of our focus areas. So obviously, a lot of focus on manufacturing and sustainability with direct support to clients, but also supply chain sustainability. And those are really the two programs we'll talk to you about today. So one of the things that we do leverage across the state are university partners. As I had mentioned, we're at RIT, but we also have university partners at Clarkson University, RPI, Binghamton, and Cornell are some of the other university partners. So in many cases, if we can leverage some of these other university partners to help us provide support on projects. We also leverage manufacturing extension partnerships where we work with these MEPs across the state in helping provide support to clients as well. So we have a wide variety of different networks and resources to us throughout the state. One last thing I did want to mention before I kind of get into the slides is typical type projects that we help provide support on. New York-based projects, we have to have some kind of a presence within New York State. A lot of the funding, as I had mentioned up front, is really managed through the state. There's a small little cost share for the company that or the client that we work with. And so that's typically a 4 to 6 month project, and we can help provide support as needed to any company. More specifically, over the last year, we've been helping a lot with wineries and breweries. And so what I wanted to talk to you a little about today is a partnership we have in place with Cornell. Cornell has the food science area. They're also focused a lot with the wine. And so we're specifically helping and working with them on the brewery initiative in this case. And it's really helping provide practical sustainability tools for breweries across the state. So a lot of the solutions around process improvements, efficiency gains, water, chemical, and wastewater use reduction, energy, and waste reduction. So that's really kind of the focus. And I will kind of walk you through our timeline, and it kind of helps provide you a good scope of what we're doing. So from a timeline standpoint, the first phase was really kickoff and promotion. And then we got into kind of screening some breweries and selection, some P2 opportunity assessments, an implementation project, and then some of the tech transfer. So within the kickoff and promotion, we engaged the stakeholders, we promoted the activity, and then really the lion's share of the project was really focused on looking at a cross-section of breweries across the state and helping provide them some sustainability support. And so that was really with these P2 opportunity assessments. So far, we've completed 9 of them. We're actually looking for a 10th brewery to work with. So I guess it's somewhat paid advertisement here. So if you're interested, I'll definitely be able to talk with you at some point. But we finished 9 of these assessments. And we really kind of focused in on all of those environmental impacts I had mentioned to you before. And then we provide support with a report kind of focusing in on what you're doing really well on with environmental achievements and where there could be some potential opportunities. There's also an implementation project. We're about 70% complete with that. And really the last focus was really on putting a guidance document in place, as well as a fact sheet, which really culminates from all of the opportunity assessments. It's really a kind of a summary of what we've learned through conducting these assessments. And so the last thing I did want to mention is from a sustainability brewing standpoint, we have a webinar series that's in place. It's scheduled for May 4th and May 11th. The first date will be really focused on water and chemical use reduction. And so that's identified here. The following week, May 11th, is really going to be focused on waste reduction and energy conservation initiatives. So in both webinars, we have industry leaders within the brewery, sustainability brewing industry, some subject matter experts, and some key brewery panelists. So I think it's going to help provide a good cross-section of support, but also good practices along the way. I know Megan is putting the links for both of those sessions in the chat. So if you're interested, by all means, please sign up. There's no fee. It's a free webinar series, if you will. So one of the things I did want to cover before handing it over to Trish, I wanted to kind of walk you through some of the findings that we had through some of these opportunity assessments. So obviously these are not all of them, but I wanted to at least touch on some of the key best practices that we learned in some of the environmental areas of focus. As you all know, water is used in every step of the brewing process. And then the cost of water is much greater than just what you see with the water bill. I mean, there's a lot of downstream impacts on cost with the cost of energy and labor costs and water processing and treatment costs. So all of those things add up. So, so when you're looking at water, you shouldn't just look at the purchase water cost because there's a lot of other downstream impacts to cost. But some of the best practices that we uncovered are found in some of the breweries that we visited and or some of the opportunities or recommendations we made One is installing water meters. By itself, it's not saving you any money, but it gives you a better understanding of how and where there could be some potential opportunities for water reuse. Targeting any irregularities in water consumption, I think, is another key area of focus. Considering low flow nozzles and fixtures and toilets and things like that. I think it's important when you're doing that, you need to test it, right? I mean, you can't just implement and go. You need to really test these types of things to make sure it's giving you the performance that you need. But those are things that you should consider along the way. Another one would be implementing sensors and precision controls, making sure you're not overflowing, or making sure you have the right controls in place for maybe understanding cleanliness. Maybe those are some types of indicator strips that you could possibly use. And I think a key one would be reuse. And that's a really key one, and it's very process specific. So depending on your brewery operation specifically, looking for water reuse for multiple purposes, I think is an important one. And one that's always thought of up front is the final rinse could be an initial rinse in your next cleaning cycle. Or I think that would be a big one. Or as cleaning the floors could be water from a final rinse as well. So those types of things could be taken under an advisement on ways to reduce water use, but also understand your kind of your strategy, your sustainability strategy. And so my plan was to kind of walk you through a couple of these other than water use, like wastewater discharge. I know this is somewhat an area of concern. There's still a lot of unknowns moving forward on where wastewater is going from regulations. I know there's a seminar or webinar later today to talk a little more about this. But some of the things that you do know, or at least I do know, is thresholds for discharging water are typically set below the brewery wastewater achieves. That really requires a lot of vigor or focus on wastewater as you grow, or as you increase your production. So depending on the size of the brewery, it's common to treat before you send to the sewer, and then treatment ranges from simple pH adjustments to focus in on like COD or BOD type levels. So those are important areas. I think some of the best practices that we had seen through some of our assessments were monitoring and reducing BOD and suspended solids. Some different ways of like mechanical separations or chemical oxidations could be good ways for reductions. Side streaming was another area of opportunities where you could side stream to reduce a lot of that up front. Biological treatments, in many cases, depending on the size of the brewery, you may need to truck the BOD laden wastewater off-site. Depending on the size, you may not be able to afford something like a biogas digester, but you can take advantage of trucking it off-site to where there is a local one. Utilizing leach fields, depending on where you're located, to manage some of your wastewater, or implementing membrane bioreactors, depending on your size. So a lot of these are very cost focused type decisions. So depending on where you're at, you may need to leverage different types of applications, like the BOD laden wastewater offsite. Maybe that's a better route to look at. So chemical use, this is an area of a lot of focus for breweries, I'm sure, as far as keeping equipment clean. They probably spend more time cleaning than they do brewing. So this is a very integral part of a brewery function. And it really uses a lot of chemicals throughout the brewery operation itself. It does have a lasting impact on the environment, and so making good choices on chemical use, I think, in the long run is helpful. It probably doesn't have a lot of cost savings, but I think environmental footprint would be beneficial here. Reutilizing some of the cleaning solutions, as we had discussed before, could be good. From one final rinse going into an initial rinse, not only is that saving water, but it's also saving chemicals. Reutilizing cleaning solutions, like going from a final rinse to maybe cleaning the floors, that could be another one. Implementing CIP systems, like clean in place systems, that really limits a lot of your chemical use as well. Rotating chemicals isn't really a reduction in chemistry, but it maintains the effectiveness of the chemistry. So rotating chemical chemistries or cleaning chemistries will help decrease the chance of bacteria growth, and it helps maximize the effectiveness. And then really investigating less toxic chemistries like EDTA or citric instead of like phosphoric acid is one type of investigation that you may want to explore. Those were just several of the best practices that came out of our reviews. And then energy use, one thing I didn't capture onto the slide, but I did want to mention, and I can follow up with this in a URL link, is the Energy Smart at the EPA has done a really nice job on putting a treasure map together for breweries, microbreweries. So if you type in EPA Energy Smart, they have done a very nice job of putting together a very detailed energy audit for energy use at a microbrewery. And so that's one of the speakers that will be presenting at our webinar. But you know, I think we kind of just touched the surface here to talk about the different types of energy that's being used with the electrical, heating, compressor, and cooling, and some of the best practices around that. We've done a significant amount of work with heat exchangers, and I think that's a great way to identify ways to recover energy. The time brewing process to use hot water, I think, is another one. Like, so making sure when you're putting your production schedules together, you can understand, can you take advantage of hot water from one process step to another without losing some energy? Insulating your pipes, I think, is always important. Insulating or installing LED with motion sensors is a key one. And then pursuing simple actions like closing doors, like a lot of the behavioral things, I think, is really important. And that's a good way of looking at energy use. But one of the key takeaways from this slide is really kind of looking at what things can you do initially, because it's a process, right? You can't do everything all at once, but look at the ones that are the low-hanging fruit, and then from there build to the ones that you can afford to do. And then one of the last slides I did want to focus on was waste reduction. So I don't know if you're familiar with this waste management hierarchy, but we use it all the time within P2I. A lot of our focus is on source reduction and reuse. So that's really where we focus all our activities. And then the next level down would be like recycling and composting, and then energy recovery, and then treatment and disposal, which is really landfill. So a lot of our activities is focused in this top part. And the best practice by far is waste minimization. Just don't generate the waste if possible. But also if waste is generating, disposing of it, spent grain versus alternate methods such as a cow or pig farmers is used a lot within the brewery industry. And possibly composting or anaerobic digestion. Reusing yeast multiple times for disposal I know is a key one that's used quite a bit. And decreasing the number of waste plastic bags. This is an area that I'm sure Trish will talk a little about. I did repeat the anaerobic waste to energy. And then like recapturing CO2 is another key area, which is a big one for waste reduction itself. And then I think another one, which really has a lot to do with sustainability, is really leveraging trade organizations like the one here with the New York State Brewers Association and the National Brewers Association and even the Master Brewers Association. All of them have great ideas. You can't go alone with a lot of this stuff. You have to really kind of reach out and identify organizations that help provide the sustainability initiatives. And all three of these would be great. A lot of tech transfer of knowledge and best management practices on doing things the right way. And so make sure you take advantage of this as best you can. And with that, I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague, Trish Donohue, who will talk a little about the supply chain aspect of the sustainability piece. So thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ken. Hi, Trish.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, no problem.
Good morning, everyone. And as Ken mentioned, at P2I, we support businesses in New York State. And when it comes to environmental sustainability, businesses don't always know where to begin. So I think a lot of the information that Ken just provided is fairly common knowledge, but sometimes a company just really doesn't know where to start or how to prioritize those things. So we've created some guidance for craft brewers. Ken, if you could go to the next slide. So this guidance answers the most common questions we have been asked in our work with brewers across New York State. We hope this guidance will be a great starting point for any brewer looking to grow a more sustainable craft brewing industry overall and better reflect your customers and their values. A lot of them are really choosing businesses based on their sustainability commitments. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we will walk through the guidance document. The first one shown on the left is the how to build a sustainable supply chain for your craft brewery. And on the right is a template that we've created that you can use, and we'll walk through that today. Next slide, Ken. So I first just need to mention that this guidance was developed in partnership with the Carey Institute for Global Good. I hope that most of you are very familiar with them. We tapped into their expertise in working with farm breweries and Source New York that brings farmers and brewers together. So what we do know is that craft beer drinkers from all over are falling in love with New York State craft breweries, and they love them even more when they brew sustainably. But brewing and sustainability are about more than just what happens inside your brewery, like Ken was just talking about. It's also the entire supply chain that you depend on. That means all the ingredients you source, your packaging, and how you store and ship your beer. We also know that sustainable beer tastes better, and there is a study to prove it. So in 2018, an international survey of beer consumers found that taste and sustainability play a key role in consumer preference for craft beer. And 50% of those respondents claimed that they believe craft beer is more sustainable than regular beer. And this makes the product more attractive to consumers. So you already stand out. You may not know it, but you already are differentiating yourselves from just regular beer based on sustainable practices that are common with craft breweries. And that's good news for us and for the environment. Next slide, Ken. So let's just think about your supply chain. Over 20% of the craft brewing industry's impact on the environment is actually caused by what happens within the walls of your brewery, and the rest of the environmental impacts come from the businesses that supply ingredients to you. such as farmers and processors and manufacturers. And we call what we call your upstream supply chain. So those things that are on the left are the upstream, and other impacts from how your beer is packaged and distributed are what we call the downstream supply chain. So the things that are kind of there in the middle. It really helps to think of a supply chain as a river. What happens upstream affects what happens downstream. And where does your brewery fall? Or your brewery actually falls right there in the middle. So your brewery has impacts, upstream has impacts, downstream has impacts, and this makes up the supply chain. And there's a lot to consider. So like I said in the beginning, where do we start? How do you figure out where to focus your sustainability efforts, whether it's internal to your brewery or externally? Well, we're helping you figure that out. So you can focus your efforts on what a very well-known craft brewer has found out. So New Belgium Brewing, they set the standard for brewery sustainability way back in 2008. They were one of the first craft breweries to perform what we call a life cycle assessment of its internal processes and its entire supply chain. So they put a lot of effort and funding into what we call this life cycle assessment to look at all of the impacts. And they were very focused on greenhouse gas emissions. So the results of the study showed that about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with brewing beer were generated upstream in their supply chain, namely glass and barley and malt, which you can see in that little box down on the bottom. So you don't need to conduct a fancy life cycle assessment to integrate sustainability into your upstream supply chain. New Belgium already helped figure out where that focus can be. You can just simply start with something as simple as conversations with your suppliers and staff. And it's really about building those relationships with your suppliers that are upstream. Next slide, Ken. So I know that you can't really see some of these words too well, but this is one of the visuals that's from the guidance document. And we certainly encourage you to go and check out these documents when we're done. I do have a link at the end. And as we just mentioned, the processes within the craft brewing supply chain that are most responsible for the industry's impact on the environment are barley agriculture, malting, and packaging. And these processes are where raw materials and energy enter into the brewing process, but it's also how most of its waste is created. So altogether, packaging, which is glass and can manufacturing, barley production, and malting make up more than 75% of the upstream environmental impacts of brewing beer. I'll say that again, 75% of the upstream environmental impacts of brewing beer come from these three things that you see on your screen, which really means that the other 25% of the impacts come from within your brewery or downstream. So this is where we really want to focus if we're thinking about sustainability holistically across the brewing industry. So let's just start with barley agriculture. The bulk of barley in the US is grown in North Dakota, Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Minnesota, and you probably already know that. But this means that the impacts are mostly created from transportation. It's also important to consider the farmers and their use of pesticides and fertilizers and a lot of water for irrigation, which also causes runoff, and that pollutes the nearby bodies of water. So you can see some of that indicated there. For malting, malting requires electricity and natural gas to warm steep water and control air temperature for germination, drying, curing, and roasting. So surprisingly, 1 metric ton of malt produces the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as a gas engine passenger car that's been driven 690 miles. And malting uses significant amounts of water. Another study, 2006, estimated that 1,320 gallons of water, so over 1,000 gallons of water were used to produce just 1 ton of finished malt. That's a lot of water. Let's talk about packaging here. So for cans, aluminum is made from bauxite, which is mined in Australia, China, Brazil, Jamaica, Guinea, and India. And mining requires clear cutting of the land, causes soil erosion and degradation, not to mention the transportation and the energy required to manufacture cans in the United States. So once that aluminum gets here. Glass packaging, so the production of glass bottles uses a lot of energy to melt down silica and other materials, and that emits greenhouse gas emissions as well. But you might say that not all cans and bottles are made from raw materials, and that many are recycled and have recycled content. And what's interesting is that glass bottles made with recycled content use less energy than manufacturing aluminum cans. However, glass bottles are much heavier and they require more energy to transport. So if you think about, obviously, the weight of a glass bottle versus the weight of a can, and you fill a tractor trailer with glass bottles versus cans, you know that that tractor trailer is going to burn more fuel by transporting the heavier glass than by transporting the lighter aluminum. So the glass bottles are making the overall impact of glass comparable to that of aluminum, and we call these trade-offs. So for your material choices, it may depend on which environmental impacts are most important to you. Is it recyclability and recycled content, or is it greenhouse gas emissions? We call these trade-offs again because you might be considering one type of packaging versus another type of packaging. One is more recycled and has more recycled content versus the other that has fewer greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, Ken. So how do we even know how to make these sustainable decisions? Building a sustainable supply chain for your brewery means rethinking your process from the ground up. A good place to start is to talk with the companies that you work with upstream and downstream in your supply chain to share your goals and learn about their practices too. You might learn that your suppliers already use sustainable practices, or it might mean needing to discover new suppliers or considering new ingredients because you're looking for more sustainable suppliers to help grow your business as a more sustainable business, because you can only claim that your business is sustainable based on the types of ingredients and packaging and practices that you're bringing into your brewery. So let's just start with barley. We mentioned some of the environmental impacts with barley just a minute ago, but barley grown using sustainable practices includes organic production, no-till or low-till practices, dry land production, and crop rotation. Local sourcing closer to New York or even within New York State may also help reduce the impact of transportation and provide more supply chain transparency between the barley grower and the malt house. So those are all sustainable characteristics that you could be looking for from your suppliers. So for malting, there's no apparent industry standard or certification for a sustainable malt house. However, many malt houses demonstrate an awareness of their role in supporting sustainability and reducing environmental impacts. Many of the malt houses already have a sense of sustainability since their operations are pretty energy intensive. They're already trying to figure out how to reduce that energy and additional environmental impacts. So they already have a sustainability mindset. Getting to know your maltster is a good first step. So barley growers are usually contracted directly by the malt houses. So when you talk to your malt supplier to learn about how they're developing their malt, they know who their barley sources are, and you can certainly ask them questions about those barley sources and whether they're using these sustainable practices mentioned just before. And so here are some questions that you could ask about the barley and the malt. Does it have a sustainability program, or has it published a sustainability report? Oftentimes that happens on an annual basis and it's posted on the malt house's website. Does the malt house carry a certified organic option? Is it USDA certified organic or another organic certification? Does it offer winter barley malt varieties? This tends to require less fertilizer and pesticides, obviously because it's grown in the winter. And what are its barley growers' tilling, rotation, and irrigation practices? And so this really requires your malt house to know its barley supply upstream. Working with those malt houses within New York State can make answering these questions easier because you have a closer, more direct relationship with malt houses that are in New York State. All right, Ken, next slide. Here's a checklist for sustainable packaging. Reuse is the name of the game when it comes to offsetting the impacts of packaging. The most sustainable packaging option is to sell beer in a reusable glass pint from reusable steel kegs. The next best option is the reusable or refillable glass container. So if you are debating between cans or bottles, like I was just mentioning before, consider the amount of recycled content in a can or a bottle and the distance they would travel to get from your manufacturer to you. Ultimately, cans are considered the more sustainable option because they typically contain more recycled material than glass, and they are lighter to transport. So a bottle puts 20% more greenhouse gases into the air than a can does during transportation. But as I mentioned, do your homework and remember the trade-offs. So here's just a checklist for more sustainable packaging. Does it contain recycled content? And this could include any cardboard packaging, cases, or anything else that might be a paper type of product. Does it contain recycled content? Does the printing that's used on your cans and bottles and cardboard cases, etc., does it use non-toxic dyes? Is a refillable glassware used like pints and growlers? Is the glass or can manufacturer local or regional to your brewery? Does the manufacturer have a certification such as Global Recycled Standard or Recycled Content Certification? And finally, does the packaging manufacturer have a published sustainability program like Ball, Created the Glass, or Crown Cork and Seal? All right, I'll take a quick breath because we've made it through the overview of your supply chain and some sustainability considerations. So now we can switch gears to walk through the template that you can use to gauge your own sustainability goals and getting to know your suppliers. So here's that visual again of what that template looks like in the top left-hand corner. And we designed this tool so that you can use it to put sustainable supply chain practices into motion with your suppliers, and it can help you to first set a sustainable purchasing policy for your company. It can create a supplier code of conduct that you can use with your suppliers and they can sign. And it also assesses whether your environmental goals align with those of your suppliers. So we're going to walk through the template for these 4 steps. The first step is for you. The first step is for you to consider your own environmental goals and practices, whether they're small goals or large goals or even aspirational, kind of thinking way out of the box. Will we ever achieve this? But something that you're really striving for. So the self-assessment survey is to walk through your different areas of your operation and really think about the environmental impacts that Ken had mentioned in how you're evaluating those environmental impacts and what you want to prioritize and work on. The second step is so that you can understand your suppliers' practices, but this is really you doing research about them. It's not meant for you to question or contact your suppliers quite yet, but rather just doing your own research. And there's a questionnaire so that you can understand the basic environmental goals that they might have. Step 3 is the conversation with your suppliers. Now that you know a little bit about them, you can have a conversation and also tell them about your own environmental goals that you've now developed and that you're interested in learning more about your suppliers' goals. And so you can use a supplier survey in order to have that conversation with them. And then step 4 is asking suppliers to review and sign off on a supplier code of conduct. Now, don't be intimidated by that, because when you get to a point of maturity with what you're doing for sustainability, and you get to a point of where you are a leader in sustainability for craft breweries, then that's when you would want to really go into this supplier code of conduct where your suppliers are now demonstrating their commitment to environmental sustainability because you're asking to partner with them. So next slide, Ken. So step 1 is that self-assessment survey. This is what the template looks like if you were to download this off of our website. So think about your own environmental goals and practices. Maybe you reuse your hot water like Ken mentioned. Maybe you recycle or sell most of your beer by the pint. Or maybe your electricity comes from renewable sources. So just some quick questions as a starting point. You can certainly ask yourself more questions than what are here, but basically it talks first about legal requirements. Are you aware of all the environmental legal requirements that exist for your business? Are you reducing energy usage? Are you reducing water usage? Are you thinking about the waste that you're sending to landfill as opposed to how much you're recycling? Are you sending wastewater to the sewer? And lastly, how are you engaged with the community about your environmental practices? And so now that you've gotten to know yourself a little bit better, and you've possibly thought a bit harder about your own sustainability commitments and priorities, you can start to think about your suppliers, but you have to know yourself first. Next slide. So here in step 2, you're just going to research your suppliers on your own without contacting them. Again, look at their websites. Do they mention sustainability or their commitments to the environment? You already know some of your suppliers pretty well and you've discussed these topics before, or maybe your suppliers have already told you about their sustainability and maybe that's why you chose them in the first place. What is their reputation for sustainability? What are their environmental practices? Look at your malt suppliers, your grains, your hops, packaging, and any other suppliers that you want to consider. And so the template has just a bunch of lines. We simply state that you could look at your top 3 suppliers in each of these categories, just writing down their name and their supplier type. What's their location? How far away are they from you? So keeping that transportation piece in mind. And then just their contact information and taking notes about their environmental practices that you found during your research. Next slide, Ken. Next is the good part. This is actually having those conversations with your suppliers, and we recommend doing this in person when it's not COVID, or over the phone, because we don't recommend you doing this through email. It's really about gaining a rapport with your suppliers, building that relationship. And when you start these conversations, share first why you are calling and that you are thinking about your own brewery's environmental sustainability and you're interested in your suppliers' commitments to sustainability. You can share your own journey along sustainability, what you've been learning about yourselves, what you're measuring, the goals that you've set for yourself. And so one of the first questions to ask your supplier is whether they have any environmental goals. So there on the left, you might check the box right off the bat that says, nope, they answered your question to say they don't have any environmental goals. Or maybe they're in the process, just like you are, of setting those goals. Maybe they have established goals. Maybe they have established goals and they measure their performance annually. Maybe they're collecting all that data and really looking at their trends of what their impacts are doing from year to year. Maybe they're a leader and they take it one step further and they publish their environmental goals and their performance in a sustainability report annually, post it on their website, let their customers know really differentiate themselves so that they can gain more customers to them and build their business. And so these questions that you see here are very similar to the ones that you were asking yourself in your self-assessment, but these are the questions that you would then be asking of your suppliers. Next slide. And then finally, when you've evaluated all of your suppliers and you've gotten to this great maturity level of sustainability, you've learned a lot, maybe this is a year later or something along those lines, then you've evaluated all your suppliers, you feel you know which ones are important to further partner with. You can then take the next step in your relationship and enter into this code of conduct agreement with those suppliers of interest. It wouldn't necessarily be all of your suppliers. It's probably just going to be your top few that you know you will improve your sustainability impacts by partnering with them and working together on all these different sustainability elements. So step 4 is asking your suppliers to demonstrate their commitment to environmental sustainability. Share this code of conduct with them and ask them to sign off, acknowledging their receipt of this code of conduct and certifying that their operating practices meet your expectations as a customer. And you can adapt the template to reflect your own environmental goals. You can really cater this in whatever manner you'd like. It states the things that you require of them. So getting back to these main concepts about ensuring that they are abiding by and complying with legal requirements. Are they measuring their greenhouse gas emissions? So these are statements rather than questions this time, because these are your expectations for those suppliers. And ultimately, they're signing this contract with you to say, yep, sustainability is important to us. Next slide. So 5 takeaways really quick as we wrap up here. Sustainability is a market growth opportunity, and don't forget it, it's a differentiator. Craft beer drinkers want to support sustainable breweries. If your brewing process is already sustainable, like Ken mentioned, if you're already doing all of those great things inside of the 4 walls of your brewery, then consider pushing sustainability upstream into your supply chain. Familiarize yourself with sustainable and unsustainable practices so that you can recognize when things aren't what you want to be participating in with your suppliers in their practices, and then talk to your suppliers and partners to learn about their priorities. 4th, set in-house purchasing policies that help you advance your environmental goals, and don't be afraid to start small. Pick one supplier or one beer line and just test those waters and see how it goes. And lastly, don't go it alone. Collaborate with the other breweries, collaborate with your suppliers and other industry stakeholders. There's a variety of knowledge-based organizations. Ken mentioned those few that you can be members of, but certainly there's a lot of information out there. Next slide. So here's our website. Within our website, we have this resources page. If you click on industries in that circle there and select craft beverage, you'll be able to see the different resources that we offer, including the guidance document we walked through today and the templates. And as Ken continues to build his wealth of information that he walked through today from his EPA grant, you'll see more and more information there. So with that, thank you. Megan, we can open it up and take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken and Trish, for walking us through all that. I found it very informative, and I've been around the sustainability space for a long time. Ken, you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen? Great. Thanks. Okay, so Tony from Lucky Hair had a couple comments and questions. Tony, do you want to unmute your mic and go ahead?
Yeah, actually I have a couple things.
Yeah.
And another thing that I have written out but have not put in chat yet. But so you mentioned side streaming. I've side streamed before in other breweries, and I found it to be extremely wasteful just because you're putting clean water down the drain along with things that have high TSS, COD, and BOD. Where's the balance when it comes to that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you are right. I mean, I think you really have to assess it as you do it. You know, typically where I have seen side streaming Usually there's some kind of a mechanical separation afterwards with filtration to really kind of get a lot of the water out, de-water that waste. It's really a judgment call on the brewery itself on what they're going to do with that waste after the fact. Typically, if there's some kind of a secondary step to filter it, I think, or press it somehow, I think that could be something to look at. But it also depends on your size too. If you're too big, maybe it's not the right thing to be doing.
If you're side streaming, would the only reason you would be doing that would be if you had your own wastewater treatment or pre-treatment plant? Or do you think that like a city would ask you to do something like that?
I don't know if it would be a request from the city. However, it's a matter of it's one way to possibly reduce your BOD levels and allow you to take advantage of some of that waste going to pig farmers. But I can try to follow up with you specifically. I do have one contact that probably has a better understanding of that process, and I can kind of get some more details for you if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's more for education. I don't think we would have to do any kind of side streaming, as we've talked with the wastewater treatment people for our city, and they've been like, yeah, send us more stuff. So.
Yeah. I think it all depends on where you're at with your levels, and if this could be a nice complement to try to reduce some of that.
Cool. Should I just go through the rest of my questions?
Go for it, Tony.
Okay. So you're talking about glass and aluminum, and obviously crowlers are very, very popular. But then you talked about how glass is less sustainable. But you talked about a crowler with a lid and a label. It's not reusable versus a printed glass growler that's infinitely reusable. Do you know if there's any kind of like information out there which is like better? I mean, I guess the word infinitely reusable is the key takeaway from that, but.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Anytime you have something that's reusable, that's always preferable. Now, reusable requires it to be washed and sanitized, and so you're going to be using more water and energy, but we know that reusing from a materials perspective is always better than trying to recycle something. And when you look at the waste hierarchy that Ken had in his slide, actually, reuse is always more preferable than recycling. Recycling has its own issues because you still are having a lot of energy use, and you're having to transport those recyclable materials to a couple of different recycling steps along the way. So again, it goes back to the trade-offs, but yes, I would say that glass reuse is always the best.
Awesome. Cool. Then I have just one more comment. It's not really a question, but basically, so I'm very passionate about this kind of stuff, but like I find it really frustrating there are very few solutions to be more sustainable that is in any way cost effective for a brewery our size. We're probably going to hit about 1,000 barrels this year. And I don't expect it to save us money, because that's not why we're trying to be more sustainable, but it's like oftentimes like really cost prohibitive. So like capturing CO2 is a good example, where it's like, I would love to be capturing CO2, but there are no solutions for a brewery our size. And even when I've reached out to some places, they just don't respond. So it feels like a bit helpless, but and then having a sustainable mindset helps, but it's not exactly quantifiable. And so I don't know, like I've thought about getting CIP skids so I can reuse chemicals, but haven't really found a whole lot of data out there that is that kind of supports the fact that you would use far less chemicals or anything like that. But I don't know, getting assessments on how we can be more sustainable. It's just for right now, I feel like all I'm doing is having a sustainable mindset.
Hey, Tony, have you ever spoken with Earthly Labs about CO2 capture?
I don't think so. Maybe.
They're a brand new resource for the NYSBA. They just joined about a month ago.
Okay.
So their logo should be on our Partners and Allies page, and I'm more than happy to send you the contacts that we have there. But they specifically work with small scale breweries on CO2 capture.
Okay.
So I'll follow up with you.
Yeah. Awesome.
And Tony, just to build on that, I mean, we are kind of looking for that last assessment to complete. I mean, it's a free assessment. So typically when we do that walkthrough, we try to focus on little to no cost type improvements, something with a small payback period, where we cross all those 4 or 5 environmental areas. So maybe that could be a good opportunity if you're interested.
Absolutely. 100%. We've worked with Cornell a little bit here and there. We've worked with their sustainability program, but it's pretty mild as far as the information we get.
Okay, yeah, it'll be good if we can connect afterwards to talk about setting that up.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks.
I have a question about recycled content. I know there's some confusion about recyclable and recycled. So just to clarify that, but also within recycled, there's post-consumer recycled. And Trish, this I think goes back to one of your slides, should breweries specifically be looking for packaging that's post-consumer recycled, or just recycled in general is kind of good enough? Or what's your thought on that?
Great question. So the recycle verbiage can be very confusing. What you should always look for is that there's recycled content within the materials you're purchasing. Sometimes there is 100% post-consumer recycled content within usually paper products. So that would be cardboard and such. But you should understand the level of post-consumer recycled content in there. It's not always 100%. 100% is very hard to get to, but the higher the percentage, maybe it's 50% versus 30%, always go with that higher post-consumer recycled content, because what that does is ensure that the market for recyclable materials is improving and increasing. Glass recyclability has tanked. Paper has tanked. What we're really trying to do is to ensure that there's a demand for all of the glass that has been collected for recycling, and that it's actually being used to make new glass products. So the higher content of post-consumer recycled content within the things that you're purchasing will ensure the recycling economy continues. As far as recyclable, you also want to be sure that you're purchasing materials that are capable of being recycled. So recyclable. If you have a material that has multiple layers in it, or you're combining aluminum with plastic, or you're combining glass with plastic labels that can't easily be removed, then you're making those things less recyclable. And you want to be sure to have like the purest materials that you can, not multiple layers, not a lot of ink, so that those materials can be recyclable. So keep it simple. People are getting very complicated with packaging these days, and a lot of it has to do with marketing. The marketing people always want it to stand out on the shelves, and what that means is there's a lot of bright colors, a lot of plastic, a lot of, again, printed materials. Sometimes there's plastic on the outside label that's also on a plastic container, but then it has a different plastic top, and then there might be like an inner plastic lining inside of that. It's just getting very complicated, and it makes it so that that plastic can't be recycled. And so if you keep it simple, it helps the recyclable market, and it allows for less raw materials to be mined and extracted, or even from a perspective of growing certain crops too for things like paper.
Okay, great. Thank you, Trish. We are at our time Does anybody have any last minute questions or comments while we have Trish and Ken on the line? No? Okay. Our next session is at 1 o'clock. It's draft packaging line quality. I'm going to put the link right here in chat for you. Hope to see you all online at future sessions. We have a day and a half left of the virtual New York State Craft Brewers Conference. Thank you so much, Ken and Trish, for being with us today and sharing your expertise. And don't forget, everybody, all the recorded content is on our YouTube channel, so you can find it there if there's something you missed here in the live version. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Megan. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.